My name is Jason. I never thought that one day I would find myself in the center of events that would change my whole life. It all started last summer when I went with some friends to a small house by a lake in the woods of Vermont. We wanted to spend the weekend away from the hustle and bustle of the city and enjoy nature. Our friends, Mike, Sarah, and Lauren, were as excited as I was. The house belonged to Sarah's uncle, and it was quite old, but well kept. We arrived there late on Friday evening and immediately decided to make a fire by the lake. We laughed, roasted marshmallows, and shared stories. The night was dark and starless. The moon was hiding behind the clouds. When it became completely dark, we decided to go to our rooms. I got a room on the second floor overlooking the lake. As soon as I went to bed, I felt a strange uneasiness. The room seemed colder than expected, despite the fact that it was summer. Waking up in the middle of the night, I heard strange sounds coming from the forest. It was the creaking of branches and whispering. It seemed as if someone or something was walking around the house. My heart started beating faster, and I decided to go downstairs to check if everything was okay. It was quiet on the first floor. My friends were sleeping in their rooms. I looked out the window and noticed something strange on the shore of the lake. A shadow that was moving too fast for a person. I looked more closely, but the shadow had disappeared. I wrote it off to my imagination and went back to bed. In the morning, I told my friends about the night's incident, but they just laughed and said that it was all because of fatigue. We continued our rest, but I could not get rid of the feeling that someone was watching us. After our conversation in the morning, we decided to go for a walk in the forest to explore the area. Mike, as always, was full of enthusiasm and suggested finding an old path that he had heard about from friends. Sarah and Lauren supported him, and we set off. The forest seemed quiet and peaceful, but I couldn't shake off the strange feeling of uneasiness. We walked along a narrow path that led us deeper and deeper into the forest. After about an hour of walking, we came across an abandoned cabin. The cabin looked old and dilapidated, but Mike suggested that we go inside. "This is a great place for photos," he said with a smile. We went inside and immediately felt a strange atmosphere. The walls were covered in dust, and the furniture seemed ready to fall apart at one touch. While we were examining the cabin, Sarah found an old diary. She began to read it out loud, and the contents made us fall silent. The diary belonged to someone named Edward, who had lived here many years ago. He wrote about strange phenomena and missing people in this forest. We left the cabin with a heavy heart and decided to go back to the cabin. When we returned, it was already late. We lit a fire and began to cook dinner, but the uneasy feeling did not leave me. That night, I was again awakened by strange sounds. This time, it was not only whispers and creaking branches, but also obvious footsteps outside the window. I pressed myself against the glass, trying to see who was walking there, and suddenly I saw a figure of a man. It was Mike. He was standing on the shore of the lake, looking into the water and muttering something quietly. I went outside and approached him. "Mike, what are you doing here at this hour?" I asked, but he did not answer. I touched his shoulder and he turned around abruptly. His eyes were empty and emotionless. He muttered something and abruptly ran into the forest. I ran after him but soon lost sight of him. Returning to the cabin, I woke up Sarah and Lauren and told them what had happened. We spent the whole night looking for Mike, but we never found him. The next morning, we called the police. The search continued for several days, but Mike was never found. This incident was the beginning of our nightmare, from which there seemed to be no way out. Mike's disappearance left us in shock. The police conducted a thorough investigation, but without success. We decided to stay in the cabin for a few more days to try to figure out what was happening. However, fear and anxiety did not leave us. One night, when we were sitting by the fireplace, trying to distract ourselves from gloomy thoughts, there was a knock on the door. We looked at each other, not expecting anyone in these remote places. Sarah went to open the door, and on the threshold we saw a stranger. He was dressed in old, worn clothes and looked exhausted. "My name is Edward," he introduced himself, and I immediately remembered the diary found in the abandoned cabin. "I need to talk to you." We invited him inside, and he began to tell his story. Edward turned out to be the same man whose diary Sarah found. He claimed to have lived in these woods many years ago and knew about the strange events happening here. "This forest is cursed," he said with a serious face. "I've seen many people disappear without a trace. There is something evil that lives here." We listened to him with bated breath. Edward explained that he had been trying to solve the mystery of these disappearances for a long time and had found many strange symbols and signs in the forest. He offered to help us but warned us that it would be dangerous. The next day we went with Edward into the forest to look for a clue. He showed us a place where he had found ancient symbols carved into trees. These symbols looked like some kind of runes, and we couldn't understand their meaning. Edward suggested that this could be part of an ancient ritual that attracts evil forces. We began to look for other signs and symbols, hoping to find some kind of clue. Soon we came across an old stone circle, overgrown with moss and covered in strange inscriptions. Edward studied the inscriptions and said that this place was probably used for sacrifices. "We must destroy this circle," he said. "It's the only way to stop the evil." We agreed and began to break the stones, but as soon as we began, the forest around us began to rustle and move. The tree branches seemed alive, and we heard distant screams. At that moment, we realized that we were angering something powerful and dangerous. The forest came alive, reacting to our actions. We continued to break stones despite our fear. Edward seemed to know what he was doing, but his tense face betrayed his concern. As the last stone fell, everything suddenly went silent. For a few seconds, the silence was deafening, but then we heard a low rumble coming from the ground itself. "We need to get out of here!" Edward shouted, and we ran toward the cabin. The forest, which had seemed so calm in the morning, was now full of menace. The shadows moved too quickly, and the sounds of footsteps followed us. Back at the cabin, we locked the doors and windows, trying to create some sense of security. But we knew it was an illusion. Edward began to explain that breaking the stone circle could release something ancient and evil. "These rituals kept the evil locked away," he said. "Now it is free and will seek victims." The night passed in fear. We heard footsteps outside the windows, strange sounds and whispers that could not be human. The light from the flashlights could not penetrate the thick darkness that surrounded our cabin. It was as if the night itself had come to life, and we were its prisoners. In the morning, we decided that we needed to leave as soon as possible. But when we left the cabin, our car was completely destroyed. The tires were slashed, the windows were broken, and the hood was disfigured, as if it had been scratched with claws. "We're trapped," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with fear. Edward suggested that we go back into the forest and try to find a way to seal the evil again. He believed that ancient runes could help us. We had no choice, and we agreed. On our way into the forest, we came across another abandoned cabin. This time it looked more inhabited, but still abandoned. Inside, we found old books and maps that Edward assumed could have belonged to the predecessors who explored these places. One of the maps pointed to a cave deep in the forest, where ancient runes were said to be hidden. We decided to go there, hoping to find answers. The forest became more and more ominous, and every step became difficult. As we approached the cave, we felt a strange warmth coming from within. The cave was filled with a strange light, and we carefully entered. There we saw a huge stone altar covered in runes and symbols. Edward began to read aloud the words in an ancient language, and the cave began to shake. It seemed like the air around us was getting thicker and we could hardly breathe. At that moment, we realized that we had awakened something that was best left alone. As Edward finished reading the runes, the cave shook even more violently. Flashes of light appeared on the altar, and we felt an invisible force pushing us back, as if some ancient entity had awakened from a centuries-old slumber. We were overcome with fear, but we knew that we could not stop. "We have to seal the altar!" Edward shouted over the din. He pulled an old amulet from his pocket and placed it on the stones. The runes on the altar glowed brighter, and the air around us began to vibrate. Suddenly, a terrible roar was heard from the depths of the cave. Shadows began to emerge from the darkness, moving with incredible speed. They surrounded us, and I felt a cold sweat run down my back. We were on the verge of panic. "Stay together!" Sarah shouted, grabbing Lauren's hand. We huddled together, trying to protect ourselves from the pressing shadows. Edward continued to chant, but the shadows were getting closer. At that moment, I felt something pulling me back. I turned around and saw that one of the shadows had grabbed my arm. Fear paralyzed me, but I found the strength to break free. The shadow retreated, but did not disappear. Edward picked up the amulet and shone its light on the shadows. They hissed and retreated, disappearing into the darkness of the cave. We knew that this was only a temporary respite. "We need to find the central symbol," Edward said, pointing to the middle of the altar. "This is the only way to seal the evil away." We began searching for the symbol, looking at every detail on the altar. Lauren was the first to notice a small indentation in the center. Edward walked up to it and inserted the amulet. At that moment, the cave shook and the shadows began to disappear, as if dissolving into thin air, but the joy was short-lived. The cave began to collapse. We ran to the exit, trying to save ourselves. When we ran outside, the cave closed behind us, leaving only a pile of stones. We were exhausted and scared, but alive. Returning to the cabin, we hoped that the evil was now locked away forever. However, the feeling of anxiety did not leave us. We knew that there were still many secrets in this forest. In the following days, we tried to establish contact with the outside world. Sarah and Lauren restored the car, and we were finally able to leave. But each of us understood that this place left an indelible mark on our souls. Several months passed, but the nightmares did not stop. We often got together to discuss our experiences and try to understand what had really happened. Each of us began to notice strange things in our daily lives. One night, I woke up feeling like I was being watched. There was a shadow in the corner of my room. It did not move, but I knew it was real. At that moment, I realized that the curse had not gone away. It was following us. The curse that followed us had become unbearable. We had nightmares every night, and inexplicable things began to happen in our lives. We got together again to try to figure out what to do next. Edward suggested that we return to Vermont and try to find additional evidence that could help us finally get rid of the evil. We reluctantly agreed, realizing that this was our only chance. On the way to the cabin, we felt the tension growing. The forest seemed even more gloomy and threatening. When we arrived, we went straight to the ruins of the cave. However, there we found that the stones had been moved aside and the entrance was open again. Edward hypothesized that someone or something had helped release the evil. We began searching the cave, hoping to find an answer. Deep in the cave, we came across an old chest, locked with an ancient padlock. Edward used his knowledge and opened the lock. Inside the chest, we found ancient manuscripts and amulets that we hoped could help. We were able to translate one of the manuscripts, and it spoke of an ancient cult that worshipped the evil that lived in this forest. We realized that we needed to perform a ritual to seal away the evil forever. To do this, we needed amulets and a special spell that was described in the manuscript. We returned to the cabin and began to prepare for the ritual. We had to wait for the full moon, which came in a few days. All this time, we felt the presence of something evil watching us. We collected the necessary ingredients and began to memorize the spells. Fear and tension grew with each passing day, but we knew that this was our only chance. The night of the full moon arrived. We headed to the ruins of the cave where the ritual was to take place. Edward began to cast spells, and the amulets began to glow. The atmosphere around us grew more and more tense, and we felt the evil trying to resist. At the moment of greatest tension, the shadows began to appear again. They surrounded us, trying to disrupt the ritual. We held together, casting spells. The amulets glowed brighter and brighter, and it seemed that the evil was retreating. But suddenly, a terrifying roar burst from the cave. A creature of darkness and fear appeared. We were terrified, but Edward continued to cast spells, directing the light of the amulets at the creature. The creature seemed to dissolve under the light of the amulets. We put all our strength into the ritual, feeling the evil weakening. Finally, the creature let out a final roar and disappeared into thin air, leaving behind silence. We knew that this was not the end. The evil was too powerful to disappear forever, but we hoped that we had managed to at least temporarily seal it. After the ritual, we returned home, exhausted but full of hope. Life began to return to normal, and the nightmares gradually disappeared. We often gathered together, remembering our experiences and hoping that the nightmare would not happen again. Several months passed. It seemed that everything was behind us, but one day I received a strange letter. It spoke of a new cult that was gathering in the Vermont woods and trying to revive evil. We realized that our work was not yet finished. We gathered together again and went to Vermont. This time we were ready for any challenge. In the forest, we found traces of a new cult performing rituals in an attempt to awaken evil. We confronted the cult members in an old cave. They were armed and dangerous, but we had amulets and knowledge. The battle was brutal, but we managed to win. We performed a new ritual to finally seal the evil. As we left the forest, we felt that we had finally won. The evil was sealed, and we could live in peace, knowing that the nightmare was in the past. Despite our victory, the peace did not last long. We began to notice strange phenomena in our everyday lives. Lauren said that she saw shadows in the mirror. Sarah heard whispers at night, and objects in my house began to move. Edward claimed that the evil was too strong and ancient to be sealed forever. He suggested that we study ancient books and manuscripts to find a way to get rid of the curse forever. We decided to seek help from a university professor, an expert in ancient cultures and the occult. Professor James Harrington was interested in our stories and agreed to help. Together with him, we began to study the ancient texts we found in the cave. James found a mention of an ancient artifact that could destroy evil. This artifact, according to the texts, was hidden in the Appalachian Mountains. We set off for the mountains armed with new knowledge and artifacts. The search was long and dangerous. The forest became threatening again, and it seemed that the evil was watching us. A few days later, we came across an ancient sanctuary hidden deep in the forest. Inside, we found the symbols we had seen before and an altar with the artifact in question. It looked like an ancient crystal, glowing with a soft blue light. When we took the artifact, the forest came to life. We felt the earth begin to tremble, and creatures similar to those we had encountered before emerged from the shadows. We knew we had awakened something powerful. Edward, holding the artifact, began to cast spells. The light from the crystal grew stronger, and the creatures began to retreat. We knew this was our only chance to destroy the evil. A battle began in the forest. The creatures attacked us, but the artifact protected us. Edward continued to cast spells, and the light from the crystal became blinding. At the moment of greatest tension, the evil began to manifest itself in the form of a huge, dark creature. We combined our powers and directed all the energy of the artifact at this creature. Light and darkness clashed in a final battle, and finally the creature let out a final roar and disappeared, leaving only emptiness behind. The forest became quiet and peaceful again. We knew we had won, and the evil had been destroyed forever. After defeating the evil, we returned home. For the first time in a long time, we felt free from the curse. Life gradually began to return to normal. The nightmares stopped and the strange phenomena disappeared. We could sleep peacefully again. Each of us tried to find meaning in what we had experienced. Edward returned to his research, publishing articles on ancient cults and artifacts. Sarah and Lauren began to help others in similar situations, creating a charity foundation. I decided to write a book about our experiences to share this story with the world. Several years passed, and we decided to get together again on the anniversary of our victory. We met in a cafe, reminiscing about the horrors we had gone through, but now we could laugh and joke, knowing that the worst was behind us. One day I received a letter. It told about new research that concerned ancient artifacts and rituals. The letter was signed by Professor Harrington. He wrote that he had found references to another artifact that could be related to the one we had destroyed. We gathered again to discuss the letter. Edward was intrigued and offered to help Professor Harrington. We felt that we had to finish what we had started. We went to the university, where the professor told us about his findings. The professor's research led us to Europe, where, according to him, there was another artifact related to an ancient cult. We decided to go there to learn more. The journey was full of mysteries and dangers. Our search led us to an ancient castle hidden in the mountains. The castle was abandoned, but inside we found many ancient symbols and manuscripts. This place was the center of the cult, and we felt its power. We began to study the manuscripts and symbols. They spoke of another powerful artifact that could control the forces of darkness. We realized that this artifact was used to maintain the balance between light and darkness. In the castle, we encountered a group of people who called themselves the Guardians. They claimed to protect this artifact from those who wanted to use it for evil purposes, but we were unsure of their intentions and felt threatened. We tried to explain our mission to the Guardians, but they were hostile. We had to convince them of our good intentions in order to continue our research. Eventually, they agreed to help us. With the help of the Guardians, we found the artifact. It was hidden deep in the castle, protected by magical barriers. Edward began to study it to understand how the artifact could be used to finally destroy evil. Studying the artifact led us to new spells and rituals. We realized that the artifact could be used to strengthen our protective ritual. But this also meant that evil would fight us even harder. We began to prepare for the final ritual. The Guardians provided us with all the necessary ingredients and protective amulets. We knew that this would be our last battle with the ancient evil. The night of the ritual arrived. We gathered in the center of the castle, surrounded by protective circles. Edward began casting spells, and the artifact glowed with a bright light. The forest around the castle came to life, and the shadows began to approach. The shadows attacked us with renewed vigor, but this time we were ready. The light forces from the artifact helped us hold back the onslaught of darkness. We continued the ritual despite all the obstacles. From the depths of the castle, a creature similar to the one we had previously encountered emerged, but this time it was even stronger. We combined our powers and directed all the energy of the artifact at it. The battle was brutal and exhausting. We felt our strength leaving us, but we continued to fight. The light from the artifact grew brighter and the creature began to weaken. Finally, the creature let out a final roar and disappeared. We were victorious. The castle was once again plunged into silence and the artifact went out. We knew that evil had been destroyed forever. We returned home knowing that our work was done. Life began to recover and we felt like we could start over with a clean slate. Our nightmares were a thing of the past and we could enjoy a peaceful life. Each of us found our own path. Edward continued his research. Sarah and Lauren expanded their philanthropic work, and I completed my book. We knew we would always be connected by this experience and would remain friends forever. But from time to time, the old fears returned. I often found myself looking around in the darkness, expecting to see something sinister. But each time I was convinced that the evil was left behind. Our story became a legend, passed down through generations. We hoped that our experience would serve as a warning to those who encountered ancient forces. Years passed and we began to grow old. But even in old age, we continued to keep in touch with each other. We knew that our union had helped us overcome all the trials. We gathered together one last time to celebrate the anniversary of our victory. Remembering all that we had been through, we felt deep gratitude for having survived and won. With each passing year, our meetings became less frequent. Eventually, we realized that it was time to say goodbye. But we knew that our friendship would live forever in our hearts. Our children and grandchildren learned of our exploits and carried on our legacy. They sought to study ancient cults and artifacts to prevent similar threats in the future. One day we learned that the artifact had disappeared. We were afraid that evil might return again. Our children and grandchildren began searching to return the artifact and make the world safe. Our heirs went to the same forests and mountains where we had fought evil, determined to finish what we had started and seal away evil forever. Our children united with the descendants of the Guardians to fight evil. They knew that only by working together could they win. During the search for the artifact, our heirs encountered new manifestations of evil. These were the same shadows and creatures that we had fought, but now they were stronger and more dangerous. As before, but neither of us could forget the experience. We continued to keep in touch, meeting often to discuss our feelings and memories. Sometimes it seemed as if the Vermont forest had not completely let us go. We always remained on guard, wary of strange and suspicious events. Edward, in turn, continued his research into the occult, hoping that his knowledge would help prevent such incidents in the future. He also began writing a book about his experiences so that others could avoid the horrors we had faced. We decided to move on with our lives, but every event, every strange coincidence, reminded us of the evil we had once fought. Sometimes, when the night wind whispered through the windows, We remembered that dark creature and how it could still watch over us, even if we did not feel its presence. My nightmares subsided, but in the silence of the night, I still felt that ancient threat. Sometimes I felt like I could hear echoes of my past experiences, whispers and footsteps that reminded me of the horror that had been with us. It was like a constant reminder that evil can be defeated, but its mark can remain. We were all trying to find normalcy in our lives, but we knew that we could never fully forget what had happened. The Vermont forest and its secrets would forever be part of our history, and every memory of that horror reminded us that we had prevailed. And though we continued to live and move forward, each of us had been changed by the experience. We knew that we had overcome a great threat, but the shadow of those nights when we had faced an ancient evil and fought for our lives and freedom remained. Each of us tried to rebuild our lives and survive the past. But the nights were still filled with anxiety and uncertainty. We spent time together, trying to support each other, and continued to research